My name is Jim Wooley. I am a senior delivery principal with Slalom. We're an international consulting firm, have over 20,000 people worldwide at this point, primarily a local model. So I actually work out of the Atlanta office. We have a South Florida office as well. So if anybody's interested in consulting, needing consulting services, in the Jacksonville area, it's going to be a slightly different model because we haven't expanded into this area yet, but yet might be a key word there. We'll see how long it takes us to get here. But if you're interested in that, that's my sales pitch. We'll talk about that later after, in the party afterwards if you want. What we want to talk about today is improving your code quality using tools. We just came from a session. How many were in the session right before this one around code quality and clean code and those kinds of things? So there's probably going to be some overlap, and he showed you some of, here are things that you should do, and I'm going to show you how you can use tools to try to clue you in that those are things that you should do, so that then you can have your business focus on delivering business value, not worrying about trying to do the minor tweaks of, do we need to have the conversation of tabs versus spaces? Okay, good. And if we do, then watch, there's a Silicon Valley episode which covers that pretty well anyway. So I do have some links here. My GitHub IO has links to a bunch of my different presentations, including this one. This particular presentation, the presentation and the samples are already available online on my GitHub at the /analyzers. And then also I have a set of hands-on labs which will walk you through some of these things as well. And also, I don't know if I'm going to have time by the end of this, within an hour, to cover creating your own analyzer in C#. But I do have a hands-on lab which directly goes to that. So if I excite you around this and you want to dig deeper into it, we can have a conversation afterwards, or that hands-on lab is there, because it's not something which is for the faint of heart. You basically have to learn and understand everything about the language in its nitty-gritty details in order to actually write one of these. So that's all there. So let's just jump into it. About me, I don't include my email address on the slides, but if you ever want to email me, it's easy. It's jimw@slalom.com, slalom like skiing. And so really easy to get in touch with me. My Twitter alias @JimWooley. So this is a great time to tweet me on how great this presentation is going to be. Don't wait till the end. You don't need to. And I wrote a book on Link, so if you ever bought that book, I appreciate your quarter of royalty at this point. Okay, so I said I was a senior delivery principal. What does that mean? I'm one of the people that's sort of in charge of making sure that the code that we create for companies is of good quality and we deliver on time and all those kinds of things. So I do a lot of architecture and leading of teams, and so that's sort of where some of this comes. So some of the things I'm going to be showing you comes from my years of experience of seeing that this is not a good way of doing stuff, and these are better ways of doing it, right? So in terms of code quality, I sort of see a pyramid where just because it compiles doesn't mean we're ready to ship it, right? We might want to do a little bit more in terms of making sure that things are good in our code. And there's plenty of seats down here if anybody wants to come down and join us as well. Hopefully you have some sort of a unit testing strategy so that it doesn't have to be testing 100% of the code, right? Plumbing code, you probably don't need to unit test until you do. Business logic, if somebody says, given this, when this happens, I expect this to be the result. I think you probably should have a test for that, to then make sure that if there are any changes that happen to my code over time, that we'll be able to catch that and handle the regressions, and that's where it really pays for itself. It doesn't pay for itself just writing tests for the sake of writing tests, but it does pay for itself in the long run of trying to do the other things. The other area in unit testing I find is, how many times do you, for a unit test, load up the application, log into the screen, navigate 5 screens under to perform this math function, only to realize that the math function needs to get altered, and so you need to close it down, go back down, make the code change, and now we're going to start it back up again, log in, navigate those 5 screens to get to that function, and now I still need to make another change, right? If we just wrote one function to be able to test that, or the page URL changes, or what have you. If we wrote a small function to be able to test that, then it makes it so much easier over time, right? So I definitely think writing tests is a plus. Having some sort of a style guide or something that you agree on within your organization or within your company, or even if you're an individual, as we said earlier today on the clean code, don't anticipate that you're going to be the only one who's ever going to read your own code, right? anticipate that at some point you're going to want to share that code with somebody else, or have them take a look at it and give you some critique. Or you're going to even want to take a look at it 6 months down the road and make sure that you can understand it. And making sure that you're abiding by some sort of a coding standard. That doesn't mean you have to go out and write a 100-page document that says, here's, thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do this. There's lots of guides that are out there. A lot of the programming paradigms already have these informal, formal guides. Like, where do you put the open curly in C# is different from where do you put the open curly in JavaScript. Right? And there's actually established patterns around these. The C# team, for example, has a published guide of, and it's only about a page and a half, of these are the things that you should do if you're going to contribute to the Roslyn repo. And so take some of the established patterns that are out there for the industry in your particular programming environment and use those. Because chances are, if you put that open curly on the wrong line in a different programming language, and somebody else comes in and says, oh, they don't know what they're doing. They must be a JavaScript developer and they're writing C#, so their C# code's going to suck because they don't know how to write good C#, just because you put a curly in the wrong place, right? You don't want that. You want to make sure that we're living by some of these guides. And so when we have these style guides, so we can use tools to be able to check those guides and make sure that we're abiding by those. We don't want to have our code reviews say, oh, you forgot a semicolon here, right? We want to make sure that we're focusing on things which are really business values. So then we can have our peer reviews be more effective. Then hopefully we have some sort of a CI/CD process which can integrates all these tools in there and makes sure and enforces those as we're going forward, and allows us to have a repeatable process of delivery. And then there are some tools out there, in particular Sonar, Fortify, which allow you to do trend analysis to see, okay, is the quality of my code going up or down based off of the various check-ins? And are we having more code churn as we're getting close to a release? And that may be an indicator that there may be a problem getting ready for the release. Some of those kinds of things are good things to track onto. And so there are tools that can do that kind of thing as well. Now, if we look at this pyramid, two of these are sort of distinct from the others. Can anybody tell me what's distinct about style guide and peer reviews that the others don't really have?
Subjectivity.
Why is it subjective?
Involves human eyes and human thought.
Right. Humans are involved. I mean, yes, humans have to write the unit tests, right? But they don't have to execute them and make sure that and enforce that they're already running properly. You can use tools to do that. Same with static analysis. So we can keep the people involved in the areas that people need to be focused on, and let tools do those other mundane things. And that's really where static analysis comes into play. So I thought Wikipedia article had a good summarization of static analysis. And one of the key things to call out here is that static analysis is able to take a look at your source code, and your code doesn't even have to compile in order to check to see if it's actually doing what it says that you're trying to do. Right? Now let's say you're on a team that doesn't do all of this. They don't have some standards within the organization. They don't have those kinds of things. As you come in Monday morning, is your team going to look like this, where everybody's onto themselves, everybody's doing their own thing, nobody cares what anybody else is doing? What's the code going to look like when you have this, right? Probably going to be a real mess. Anybody on one of those teams or have been on one of those teams before? I'm sure that some of you have, right? But we also don't want to be so rigid that it's just a bunch of automatrons that are doing the same thing over and over, and there's absolutely no creativity whatsoever, and you're not really providing some great value. And so I'm come from a musical background. I think sort of a jazz ensemble is really a good idea. So everybody has the core melodies and harmonies and rhythms, and they know the song and how it's sort of put together, but they're all able to do their own riff on it and provide their own unique spin on that. And so each developer's unique contributions are valued so that they can then express themselves individually. And when two people start having these things coming together, then sometimes you can come up with really interesting solutions that are sort of outside that box, and that's where the real magic happens, right? So making sure that your systems are flexible enough to be able to support this, but having sort of those backgrounds and such to be able to put these in place. So why should we use these? There's lots of reasons. Standardizing within your team, or even if you're individual, to be able to sort of have those standards that you'll be able to repeat out there and be able to improve your maintainability. A lot of code reviews focus on your domain-specific things, detect common errors. Maybe the compiler says, I accept a string. Well, this string is supposed to be a URI, and the string that you're providing me is not a URI. maybe the compiler can check those, or a static analysis tool can check the syntax of how you got there to say, are you actually going to be passing me the right thing, and telling you before you ship it to production that there's a problem, rather than waiting until you ship it in production. Because the most expensive bug to fix is one that's in production. If we can move the process as far left as possible to as far close to the developer as possible, it's much cheaper to fix that problem than it is to wait until it gets further in the process. Anybody read Steve McConnell's Code Complete? It's a classic tome similar to the Robert Martin's book as well. But in Code Complete, he's sort of giving the actual statistics of what has happened from companies in general and how expensive it is to fix a problem after it's gone into production rather than otherwise. And code smells. This is a really fishy slide, isn't it? I should probably debug it and get it. So fixing code smells, not cod smelts. So you've probably seen code that looks like this. And yeah, there's probably 200 lines of code that was right there. It was so long that they had to add comments at the end of the if clauses to tell you where they started, not realizing that now in IDEs, if you just hover over this line, it'll tell you exactly what the method was where you started up here, right? But when we take a look at it a little deeper, we see that it gets a lot more complex, and we sort of have a flock of seagulls coming back down here. What can we do to sort of maybe optimize this code? Well, your if clause, if else's, right? In this if, we're not actually doing anything in the if. Why don't we just invert the if and just have what the else was and remove the else completely, right? And maybe for all of this for each, maybe we should abstract that out into something having to do with order. And so we're going to do the complex thing for customer, and then we're going to do the complex thing for order, and our code becomes much more maintainable, much more readable, and we can then unit test just the things that are around order and not around customer, right? And so we can take all of these kinds of things and maybe simplify it. For example, over here I said, if customer is not equal null, well, how about if I just short circuit that? That was what you did earlier today, right? Just short circuit that, and then we can keep the indentation further to the left and make all of our code more concise. Because as we add the complexity, there's actually a cyclomatic complexity index that you can run against your code to find out how many paths of code does an individual method go through. And the statistics are, if you have a higher cyclomatic complexity, then your code's going to be more difficult to maintain. Also more difficult to test because you have to test all the various routes through the code, right? So if we can just abstract this out, simplify it, make this, is this more maintainable or is this more maintainable? Right? And then how do we get there? So some tools might be able to help you with some of these things. People may be able to help you with some of these things and sort of work together there. Names, they're hard, right? Anybody have a situation like this? So I have a method, takes in an x, and I'm going to assign x to x. And then, so if I pass a request into the foo method and I give it a 10, what's this value going to be at the end of that method? I heard 0. Why? I heard it somewhere over here. There was a 0. Right. This is assigning this x to this x. It's not touching the class level function at all, right? We should have had this on this x, right? So I actually have a static analyzer in the labs that says, tell me any time where I have a function or a parameter or variable that has a single character in it. I can't tell you how to fix it, but at least tell me that there's a problem there. So at least we can avoid that scenario. That doesn't handle those that are only 2 characters. But there are ways of getting around some of those things. Names is hard. I mean, there's really 3 main problems in computer programming. One is names, and the other is off by 1 errors. There are numbers of tools out there which can detect security issues. In particular, in the C++ world, there's a lot of tools that will check for security kinds of things. There was a study done recently, and I think it was 2019, in North Carolina, that master's project or something went out and they looked at all of the projects on GitHub. And there are public APIs on GitHub to be able to do statistics and queries against the things that are on GitHub. And they found on there that Every day, there are 1,000 valid secrets committed to GitHub each day at that point. Now, what's a secret? An API key, a database connection string, you know what those things are, right? And you realize if I'm on GitHub and I check it in, I can see that it was checked in. Most people aren't, but I can see that I checked it in and say, oh, duh, I need to change that. And so I can go in and remove that and check in a fix for that. But if we look at the history, we can still see it, right? So there are ways that you can go in and rewrite your history. Did you realize that if you rewrite your history, if you have the original hash, you can still get it? So I think GitHub's actually added tools inside of it, and Azure DevOps has, for example, as well, that will detect when somebody tries to check in a secret and will protect the repo against that. You know, it uses some probably regular expressions and some typical kinds of things to try to check that and detect it. But these are static analysis tools that are going to try to protect you from those kinds of things. There's lots of those that are out there. Also, what about domain-specific errors? So this happens to be for a ASP.NET Classic MVC controller. And I have a controller here that the class is derived from. And is this code going to compile? I got a nod yes. What's going to happen when you try to run it?
Can't find it.
Why not?
Doesn't end in controller.
Right. You can't find it because there is a convention in this particular domain that says that the class name needs to end in controller. If it doesn't end in controller, it won't be able to find that route. So maybe it would be nice if our IDE could tell us, hey, there's a problem on here, and not only tell us that there was a problem, but also tell us how it can fix it, and maybe even fix it by itself. So in the hands-on labs that you have access to, if I can't get to it today, I have an example that shows you exactly how to create one of these. Okay? Recommending best practices. I mean, developers, we get it done, but maybe we don't necessarily get it done the best way that's possible to be done. And so maybe the tool can tell you, well, instead of doing it this way, maybe you should do it that way. Also, it's sometimes hard to keep up to date on what's going on from a language perspective. So maybe as things evolve, maybe there's a newer way of doing something which will simplify your code in general. Here's one, for example, with C#7, where C#7 allowed you to do outvars, so you didn't need to declare the variable before you actually tried to do it as an output parameter. You could just declare that output parameter inline and didn't need that separate declaration. So anytime we can remove code, we're probably going to be increasing your maintainability because it's less things that cognitively the developer has to go out and take a look at and process and understand. Sometimes we can get too cute for our own good, though, too. There are tools. This was one, Code Metrics Results, which has been around, I think, since Visual Studio 2002, where you can run this against a solution, and it'll try to give you a clue of, based off of the cyclomatic complexity and lines of code and depth of inheritance and classes that are coupled to it, what the maintainability index is going to be of that. And so you can then focus on and say, okay, those that are with a really low maintainability index, maybe I need to have somebody go through as a tech dev task and actually take a look at that and see what we can do to refactor that and improve the quality of that. Lots of tools out there. All depends on your language and your tooling. I'm mostly C#, so I have a little bit of a slant in that regard, but in this Wikipedia article, it lists a whole slew of tools, JavaScript, Ruby, Python. Pick your programming language and paradigm. There's probably tools out there that can do it. Some of the tools are not cheap. But sometimes you get what you pay for as well. So my recommendation is often even the ones that are commercial, they have an evaluation version of it. So you can take it, download it, play with it, see what it comes out to be, and then uninstall it if you say, no, this isn't for me. But I would probably recommend also make sure that you're picking one that can be customizable and configurable. So that as you say, okay, instead of saying, no, I don't agree with this rule, and no, I don't agree with this rule, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Configure the tool to say, no, and this is the rule that I want you to apply, or this is how I want you to apply that rule. And sometimes you'll find actually some of these tools don't agree with each other. And so you need to configure those differently. Bunch of tools. On the JavaScript side, it used to be JS lint, JS hint, then TS lint came out. but pretty much we've all formalized on ESLint. It's the most configurable. JSLint was basically the rules that came from Douglas Crockford's JavaScript, the good parts, and sort of codifying what was inside of that. But he didn't allow you to customize it at all. And so it was very anal retentive in saying, no, thou shalt only have 2 spaces, not even spaces versus tabs, but only two. Huh?
It was great when it came out.
Sure. But ESLint allows you to say, okay, I want to customize that, and I agree with that one, I don't agree with that one, let's go ahead. And you can actually create your own linters with ESLint as well, and so it is an extensible platform. So while TSLint came out, basically ESLint you can run against TypeScript as well, and so TSLint basically said, we're giving up, ESLint wins, and I don't need to worry about it anymore. Bunch of ones for CSS. Sonar is good. Sonar and Fortify are both server-side ones primarily, although they do have IDE-based toolings inside of that. Sonar does have a Roslyn analyzer, for example, for C# that you can run. It doesn't include all of the rules that Sonar as a framework does. But one of the good things about Sonar and Fortify in particular is that they can show you that trend analysis over time as well. Those are great for your CI/CD pipelines. Roslyn, StyleCop, FXCop. CodeCracker is an open source project that I worked on in part to learn Roslyn. It's out there. There's also Roslinator and some other Roslyn-based ones. We'll take a look at some of those today. Anybody used ReSharper, CodeRush? I've pretty much given that up in favor of all the things that are built into Visual Studio and Roslyn now at this point. It does have some additional features. Some people don't like the bloat that it puts on the IDE as well, though. So anybody have a tool that's not mentioned on here that they'd love, think everybody else needs to know about? What was that? Veracode. Yeah.
Visual Studio has a CodeMate extension that I use a lot for cleaning up the code.
CodeMate, yeah. And it automatically does the cleans for you. We've used that a little bit. We've had some problems with where some developers don't use that, and then they take that class and they make another modification, and then it looks like all of the changes the CodeMate did were things that they intentionally did, and that makes the code reviews a little more complex at that point. So, yeah, it does have some of that capability. It's mostly around removing empty lines and extra spaces. And
It's just like a freeware, all of these things are much better.
yeah, well, and all of these are free as well, and also these open source.
Well, that's the point I was going to make, is that oftentimes it's like even the paid ones, they just, behind the scenes, they'll be using the open source ones, but they'll be nicer because they can, you can easily put them into your CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of them have built-in plugins.
Yeah. One of the things with ReSharper, for example, ReSharper for years had to build their own decompiler, essentially. So if you have anybody who actually written a language compiler, with language compiler, you have a lexer and you have a parser that takes the strings of the code and figures out what does it actually mean. Well, they wrote their own, right? And Microsoft wrote one. And with 2012 or 2015, when Roslyn came out, part of the things with Roslyn was that it exposed all of that. But originally, ReSharper said, well, we're just going to continue doing our own decompiler until they realized, oh, Microsoft's putting out a new version of C# every year. And every time that they come out with a new one, we have to update our lexer and parser to be able to do more and more complex things, right? So in order to keep up, they sort of had to give up on that, I think. But yeah, there's all sorts of tools out there. Take them, try them, see how they work for you. Hopefully by the end of the session, you'll see how exciting they are to actually use and not just something that become a hindrance. Okay, so let's get into code. Enough talk. Well, almost enough talk. So JavaScript. We all know JavaScript, at least a little bit, right? So here's some JavaScript code. See how many problems you can find in this JavaScript code. It's very simple, right?
Line endings. Council block shouldn't have capitalization.
Did you find all of these? Wouldn't it be nice if a tool were able to show you that really easily and simply? You obviously know that I'm going to say, yes, there is a tool for that, right? So let's just go ahead and jump into VS Code here. So this is the same sample. Hopefully you can see that in the back. If not, there are some seats up here in the front too. So here's the same sample, and I've installed ESLint from the command line, and so now I can actually run ESLint, and whoop, no, not there. I'm going to do it in the terminal window. Yeah, come on. Yeah, I don't care about that. Okay, you want me to save it? I'll save it. Okay, whatever. So, what did I do there? I don't know what that's doing. Okay, ESLint, and I'm going to lint this. And it's going to say, hey, there are 10 problems, or 11 problems, 7 errors, 1 warning. It can automatically fix a bunch of them if you want to, and you go ahead and apply those fixes. But I have to now go in here and sort of take a look and see what are all the problems, and this is all just in one file, and then say, okay, we have a warning here. What line of code? Oh, that's line 3. I have to go up here. Wouldn't it be nicer if we actually had IDE support to be able to show exactly where that was in that development experience? Well, we do. One of the great things about VS Code is it has a bunch of extensions, and so one of the extensions that I right now have disabled is ESLint. So I can come in here, you can download and install the extension, and just go ahead and enable it. And then once I do that, I should be able to come over here. And sometimes I have to force it a little bit of wake up, let it think a little bit, or maybe try to save it. Or sometimes, let's see here. There we go. And now, right in the IDE, it's highlighting exactly what the errors are here. And so I can hover over an issue, and it's going to tell you exactly what the issue is. And many times it's going to give you a link to see, okay, if I don't understand what that issue is, I can go to the web, research that, understand what the problem is that's trying to tell me, and then I can learn about how to do code better, right? One of the great things about these static analysis tools is how much you actually learn by using them. How much you realize that you didn't know that you should be concerned about, right? So let's see what we can do about fixing this code. First of all, it says we have unreachable to code detected in the var x equals 1. Why? Because the return statement, some developer put this return statement in when they were trying to test something and they forgot to take it out. So this code's not actually going to do anything whatsoever. It would run, but it wouldn't return the results that I was expecting it to run. Okay, that's better. Now it's still not happy with that line. It wants let or const instead of var. And because we want to say, are we going to be, is this changeable or is this not changeable? In this particular case, I'm not changing this variable, so I'll go ahead and say const and fix that one. It doesn't like the open curlies here, well, or the parentheses there. It wants a space between the parentheses. This is some of that Douglas Crockford stuff that I mentioned, which is sometimes a little picky, and you can configure that whether you care about it or not. I'll go ahead and abide by it. Here we have triple equal or double equals rather than triple equals. Why should I use triple equals rather than double equals? You guys are JavaScript experts. You know what the answers are here, right? And then it doesn't like the equals 2. Why? Because this is an integer and this is a string. So we've got a type coercion here, and it's so we should probably have. Well, first of all, it wants a single quote rather than double quotes for those. But in general, it's also going to say, no, that's not the right type that you have. And it doesn't like the semicolon here. Why? JavaScript. Should be in the line above by convention. Doesn't like this X. Why not? How many people have gotten caught by this one in production? I'll raise my hand. I've done it. I admit it, right? Because JavaScript, will, if you don't have it in the right case, it'll just go ahead and create a variable for you and go. It doesn't care. Right? Okay, so that's better. This one, it wants an extra line at the end. And actually, it says I have an extra semicolon here. Well, semicolons in JavaScript are optional. And by default, the ESLint says if it's optional and it's explicit, you can go ahead and remove the semicolons. I don't agree with that. I'm more of a purist. I say every line should end in a semicolon if it's a termination. So I can actually go in to the configuration on my project, and each of these tools have different ways of configuring it. You have to read up on the help documentation on how do I configure ESLint versus TSLint versus all of those. But all of them have some way of configuring it. In this particular case, it's a JSON file. And here we have a set of rules. And one of the rules we can specify is for semi. And what's the behavior of semi? Well, I want to say I always want an error if you don't include the semicolon where it's supposed to be. So now if I go back over and save that, and I go back over to my project for linting, it says, okay, that semicolon's good, but in this line, I didn't have a semicolon where I needed one. And automatically be able to tell me about that. And so all of this is right there in my IDE. I can find it real quickly. I can fix it. I fixed a syntax, a runtime error or application errors. It was able to catch some of those kinds of things, which are logic errors. And it now allows me to focus a little bit more better on the rest of the code. Cool? Okay. If you're a designer, you might be able to get all of these things. But for developers, we don't know how to do CSS, right? CSS is hard. And so we can use tools to be able to find issues with our CSS. So for example, it's saying there's a problem with margin. Margin is 0px. What's wrong with 0px? Doesn't matter what the unit of measure is, it's 0. Right? So I can just go ahead and say, no, that this is not 0px, but it is actually 0. But it doesn't like 5px here either. Why? Because I told in my configuration that I want to make sure that everybody's using EMs, not PXs. Right? How did I do that? Over in my style int, here I say, here's the white list of available measures. So if you don't agree with me, just go in here, change this to PX, go ahead and save it, and now I come back over to my site CSS, and I have to sometimes force it, and now it says, okay, I'll let you be. That's good. But make sure it agrees with your style guide. You have the conversation with your team to say, what should we be doing here from a design perspective and such, right? It says that there's still another problem inside of here. We can come down here and it says, well, we have a WebKit border radius and you have a Mozilla border radius, but what happens if somebody hits this that isn't one of those two browsers? Well, as part of the specification for border radius, now we just say border radius. We don't need the browser-specific annotations anymore. And so we can actually optimize that and have it work on other browsers as well that all support border radius, not have to worry about the browser-specific implementations. If you didn't know that, you learned something today, right? One of the great things about some of these tools. Okay. Any questions from VS Code perspective and from JavaScript, CSS, some of those? See the benefit of it, hopefully. Okay, I want to jump over into what I do most of day to day, which is C#. So if you're a Java programmer, you can sort of tune out a little bit here, but again, a lot of tools will exist there for Java as well. I'm using Visual Studio, pulling up I have the latest version of Visual Studio installed. A lot of these kinds of things will work on earlier versions of Visual Studio as well, just slightly different tooling. In fact, one of the tools that were early static analysis tools for .NET was FXCop. FXCop originally came out as a console application back in 2005. So it's been around for quite some time. Anybody who installed it back then and ran it against your enterprise application that had millions of lines of code in it? I did. So what happened at that point was you ran it, and it came back with a report of 2,000 errors or issues that you might want to take a look at it. Some of those were globalization things, where you weren't checking globalizations on strings. But if you're doing something for your mom and pop application that's going to be just in here in Jacksonville, you may or may not care about what's going to happen with currency conversions or date string conversions in Europe, for example. So maybe you say, I don't care about those, but other things I do care about. So you take the time, you spend the next week, and you go through that list of 2,000 things, and you go and fix all of those 2,000 things, right? And you say, oh, I did a really great job. I made all these improvements on my code. And then you go back, and what do you do next? Double check it, and you run FXCop again. And you get another 2,000 things, because at that point in time, there was performance consideration that they said, after 2,000, we're going to stop the process. So we're just going to show you the 2,000 chunks at a time. Thanks. What do you do at that point? Uninstall, right? They've realized this over time. And one of the things that they've done in subsequent versions, they've changed slightly the different way that you do this, but in the subsequent versions, it allow you to configure and say, okay, I'm going to take your set of rules, and now instead of saying all of the rules are turned on by default, they say, well, here are some minimum rules which we really say that you should have, or here's the minimum recommended rules, or here is the international rules. And they have a bunch of different, what was originally rule sets. They've changed that in the latest versions of Visual Studio to use an editor config file rather than a rule set file. that you'll be able to manage these in. But the ability to customize it and turn it on and say, yes, I care about that rule. This rule, it's just an informational kind of thing, and so it's just a clue for the developer, but it's not something that they have to fix. This is potentially going to cause an error. I'm going to go ahead and say that although it would compile otherwise, this will force an error, and you can't compile it without this, right? And so you have the ability to customize those rules, set that customization, and then check that in as part of your source repo, as part of your project to say, and these are the rules that our solution is going to abide by, and then everybody can make sure that they're taking the same sets of rules. All right? So in this particular case, I have some code. This code, it has some issues that is found in the code. By default, and my mouse isn't wanting to behave anymore, so bye-bye mouse. By default, this is a pretty small set of code, but if you turn these tools on, you probably see errors. You're probably going to see 0 errors on your current code right now, I would guess. But warnings may be higher than 3, I'm suspecting, and messages, which is info level, may be a lot higher, right? And so you could find that there's a lot of code, and particularly if you have a lot of tech debt in your application, a lot of code that it's going to start complaining about, and it might be a lot to try to wade through. There's some ways that you can help to mitigate that. One of those is one that I do not recommend, and that is on the project itself, you can go to this analysis and code cleanup. You can do a code cleanup, and code cleanup automatically applies some things which are relatively safe, and there's really no way that you can break your code by applying these. And it's a fairly limited set of rules that they're saying you can apply. You can add some more to them, but by no means all of the rules that are available are you allowed to apply. There are only specific ones that they have available for you at this point. But the next one that you can do, and I do not recommend, is this build and suppress active issues. This is fine. You're going to get 0 errors and warnings and messages down at the bottom, but this is now going to inject pragmas around every line of code that it found a problem with. And your code's going to get nasty really quickly. Don't do that. What I find is usually more helpful is to A, limit the rules that you're going to apply, and then B, there's this little setting down here where you can filter the rules, and you can filter it maybe to the active files that I'm having open that I'm currently editing and working on, or the current document itself. And let's say I'm changing something in this class that's going to give me liberty to go and clean up some of the other things, and over time, our code should get better as we start to move a little forward with that one. So that may be something that you might want to take a look at. I'm going to go ahead and just do for this document alone on this project. And so I'm going to take a look first at the warnings. And first of all, we have an unreachable code detected. Well, it says var p equals new person. What's wrong with that? Why can't I get to var p equals new person? Throw? Well, it's indented, right? Oh, this isn't Python. Okay. Or F#, or yeah. So we should have curly braces, and they actually added, and they've lessened the rule on this one. In 2012, this was thou shalt put braces around every if clause, and don't have a single line if clause, and so that would help to clue in that there was a problem there. And so I can take these 2 lines and then move those up. And that should be able to isolate that, and now we can actually get to the var p, and we fixed that problem. So we actually had a logic problem that it was able to find and notify us about, right? But it says there's some other things. Let's go ahead and take a look at what some of the other things are to recommend. It says that this name can be simplified for string. So yeah, we could have the lowercase string, and it's a typing type of issue here. Say string format, oops, caps lock on. Okay, string format, and okay, that fixes that one. And then I have an object initialization can be simplified, where I can use object initializers. And so if you're not familiar, you can, on any line where you have a problem, it's going to give you this little light bulb to recommend that there's a problem. You can also hover over the problem itself, or just go onto the line and control dot. It's not very discoverable, but once you learn it, you use it all the time. So control dot will say, okay, here are the possible things that you might want to do here. And so maybe I want to use an object initializer to be able to simplify that and get that a little bit better. Remove the unused parameter. In this particular case, I have a v. I can either, that's not actually going to tell me what the fix is, but in this particular case, I can say, well, I have a discard variable, which is a new language feature that I can use. So basically, an underscore as a variable name has been available since C#1. but nobody really knew that it was there. By convention, this basically means I have a variable, don't use it, right? I have a unused assignment to result. I could take a look and see what it does it recommend that I change that to. Well, I don't necessarily, a Boolean automatically declares as false, and so I don't need to declare it as false explicitly, so I can just remove that there. I'm actually going to undo that because I have another change I want to do a little bit later. And then variable declaration can be inlined. Well, what does this mean? Well, this is that out var which came with C#7. That means we don't have to declare it externally. We just go ahead and do it all in line. So removing some code, condensing some code, making more maintainable. Life's good, right? Ready to ship it? Of course I'm not ready to ship it yet. I got more up my sleeve here, right? So that's sort of the ones that come out of the box. Now, what we can do is we can add more analyzer tools. If you're on versions of .NET before .NET 5, you can go in and add the fxcop as a NuGet package, the Roslyn fxcop package, and then we'll add that to this project. As of .NET 5 and above, they've added into it, it's basically these analyzers are built into the framework itself. And so here what we can do is we can change this, enable net analyzers, and if you go into the project properties of the project itself, there is a configurable switch inside of there that you configure it on. I'm going to set this one to true rather than false. Go ahead and save that. And now if I come back, we should start to see that there may be some more things that will start to light up here. Now we have member disposed does not access instance data and can be marked as static. So I could then say that that's static. Unnecessary assignment, okay, yeah, we had that one already. There should be some more rules there. I actually know that one of the rules that they've added, and we might want to add into this itself, is we can drill into now the analyzers. It used to be you had to go to a completely different tool set to see, and configure these analyzers. Now I can just go right in here and see the analyzers for the C#net analyzers. And I can see what are the various analyzers that are in here. I want to actually find CA2000. I happen to know that that's one that I want to add to my solution. Let's see if I can find CA2000 in here. Because I want to make sure that anything that is iDisposable is actually disposed of before we get out of there. So here I'm going to come in here and set severity, and I'm going to make this a warning, let's say. And by doing that, now I see, oh, I actually have something in this particular file which is disposable, and I didn't dispose of it. This could be a resource hole, a memory hole. It might be a problem that we want to deal with in our application. So I should probably introduce a using statement so we make sure that we're going to dispose of it appropriately. And I can do it that way, or if I'm in newer versions of the C#, and if you want to learn all the new stuff in C#, come to my session tomorrow morning. I'm just make that plug here. I can actually come in here and there's use a simple using, which allows you to inline that. I don't have now an additional nested list of these curly brackets that I need to manage and maintain. I just know that once this method goes out of scope, then it's automatically going to dispose of anything that uses the simple using clause. So a new language syntax that was added. If you didn't know about it, you learned something else new today, right? Okay, so we have unnecessary, yeah, I knew about that one. Member dispose, okay, we can make that static maybe, yeah, good. Okay, so we're better, but still I don't think I'm quite done here yet. So I'm going to go and add some open source static analyzer tools as well. So I'm going to go to my project, and on the dependencies, I'm going to manage NuGet packages. And let's go ahead and browse out and find CodeCracker. You can go ahead and install that one. Yep. Accept that. And let's see about maybe Roslinator. Roslinator analyzers. There's also Roslinator code fixes, I think, in here as well, but I'll just go to the analyzers, install that one. And see here, you could do style cop if you really want to be anal about things. There is style cop out there. I'll just point out the FX cop. If I take a look at FX cop, it says this package version is deprecated. Use the Microsoft Code Analysis Net Analyzer. And on that one, it actually says inside of here, at one point I saw, where instead of doing this, you should actually use just that enable net analyzers flag on the framework itself. But if you're in Net Core 3.1 or before, or if you're in .NET Framework, then you're still going to need to add those Roslyn packages because they're not going to be included by default inside of your project. But I don't know if you noticed when I did that, not only did I have the warnings and messages, I was pretty low on those, wasn't I? But now I got a lot more warnings and messages, but I also have errors. Let's see what's going on, because those errors, I'm not going to be able to compile with that. I'm going to break the build. So we want to make sure that we don't break the build. Let's go ahead and factor this out to just see the errors and warnings. And here we have an invalid argument reference in string format. Okay, I got a string format. Well, yeah, that should be lowercase s. But what's wrong with that? String format, his parent is 1, and the first parameter is name, so that's good, right? 0 based. Right, okay. So this should be. Anybody find this one in as a production bug? I've done it. I'll admit it. So the compiler can then look inside of a string and find compiler errors inside of strings inside of your application. That's pretty darn cool, right? And not only this, actually, but it's also going to now recommend that I can use string interpolation. So now I can do string interpolation, put that right in there. I don't have to do the string format. And now inside of the string, I can actually get IntelliSense on things that I'm able to use inside of that string. And the compiler will then check and make sure that you're not trying to call a method on that thing inside of that string, and life's even better. Okay, but it's also saying we have another error. Let's fix this error. Here I have a URI blog equals new URI, think link. No, that's not actually a valid URI. p://www dot, and this should be HTTPS because it happens to be a really great blog, mine, right? So, small plug. Okay, so but while we're in here, let's see what else we might be able to do and tweak this out a little bit more. So let's take this one and see what we can do to fix this one up. Well, we already did the throw, so let's take care of the if clause, add the braces around the if, bring the throw up, get that one in the right place. I have var person equals get Jim, and maybe I should use the explicit type. If you don't, vars versus explicit types, you can configure that setting. I'm not going to go into that one right today. See here, using clause because it is a disposable. I can use it simple using, that's good. I now have a catch block which isn't doing anything, so I can either use the discard on it, I can remove the try catch entirely and let that bubble up. I could remove the empty catch and add a to-do comment, because to-dos never get to done, right? Or I could just throw. So in this particular case, I'll just let it bubble up. I don't even need the try-catch block. We actually have a bug inside of CodeCracker, if anybody wants to take a look at it, where we don't actually pull that block out. So that was something that somebody could take a look at and help out with. Nice, a little better there. Okay, some more things we might be able to do. We have person equals new person. Well, maybe use var. Maybe I want to use an object initializer on that as well. I could inline the variable so I don't have to add that variable. And maybe I can make this more functional. And now that I have this more functional, maybe I can say this shouldn't be a method. This should actually be a property. So I might want it as a property, but I can also use property expression body members as properties too instead. Everybody know that you could do all of that stuff? See how easy it is to learn new stuff about languages, about the tools, about platforms? And if you don't like it, Control-Z is your friend as well, right? Okay, so do something interesting. I should make that static since it's not doing anything else. And let's see here. It probably doesn't like the spacing of that. It's not actually complaining about that one there. I have the person. Here's name on person. It has a little recommendation here that I can use an auto prop since I'm not doing anything inside of there. Use the auto prop. that one, okay? So I don't need the private field. It doesn't like this can vote method because I'm taking a parameter in. Well, first of all, the comments aren't actually including the parameter inside of the comments because you should have the parameter, but this parameter itself is not actually used, and I can just remove that parameter, make that a little bit better. And here I have, if the age is greater than the voting age, return true, else return false. Well, maybe I should just return directly and not even have to do the if-else at all. And okay, yeah, it's a little functional, maybe a little better. I'm a link guy. This is one of my pet peeves. Where a count is greater than 0. Anybody doing this? You know why you shouldn't do this? Count has to count the entire thing. If I know the first one is wrong, why do I have to evaluate anything else in the list? Right? And count itself can take a predicate, or instead of count is greater than 0, I should use any, which short circuits. If you're DBA, that's the same as exists, right? And so I can use any, and then any then can take a predicate, so I don't even need where at all at that point as well. So I can remove an internal state machine that is managed by a link under the covers for where. This is not the way to write a Fibonacci sequence generator because you should use a switch statement instead. But now you should actually probably use a switch expression to make it even simpler. And since we have a switch expression, single method, let's just go ahead and make that expression at that point. All right. Last one, this is an interview question. What's wrong with this code? What was that about the string? Yeah, as you're assigning a string to a string, you're creating a new copy on the stack and the heap, and your memory is going to go out the wazoo, and you're going to have garbage collections on top of those string pieces. So instead, you should probably use a string builder. If you don't know how to use a string builder, now you do. Right? Some cool stuff there. Good. So all of these are built off of Roslyn. When I did the config change, you should see now I have an additional file in my project, which is a .editor config. That editor config can also nest. So I can put that at the solution level rather than the project level, and that's going to apply to all of the other projects in the solution. But I can override that in this particular file as well. I check that into my source repo. Now everybody is going to be leveraging those same sets of rules. And this is just a basically like an INI file. Very simple to look at and edit. In fact, there's now an IDE for editing this puppy. But if you're able to, you can do open with and just open as a text editor. Take a look at it. And essentially, here's all it is, all the rules that I have. You can set up rules not only for C#, but JavaScript, Ruby, for different things. And this applies not only in Visual Studio, but also VS Code, inside of Writer, inside of a lot of different IDEs support editor config. It's an open standard. It's not something specific to Microsoft, which is one of the reasons why they went to this rather than the rule set file that they had previously. All right? So you can go in there, config it, easy to do. All of the settings are managed and maintained. Here's when I added that CA 2000. That's how we're able to set the severity on that one. I don't know. Can I actually get IntelliSense now still in severities? No. Info, error, warning. I guess since they added an IDE for it, they don't necessarily need you to IntelliSense inside of here anymore. You can set it as none or silent, and those will be refactors rather than something that's going to show up down the bottom as the errors, infos, and messages. So it'll still be available to the user to be able to use, it's just that it's not going to annoy them about those. Right? So that might be something that you can do for some of those things that you want to enable otherwise. Okay, covered a lot. Near the end of the day, at this point in time, I would usually jump into actually creating an analyzer. I'm going to show you one of the reasons why it's going to take more than 5 minutes to do this, and that is, I said, with Roslyn, they opened up the compiler, allowed us to leverage what they're already doing from an Alexa or a parser perspective and be able to see what's happening inside the visual tree. So, for example, on this one line of code, in voting age equals 18, you want to know what goes into that line of code? Well, if you install the SDK, for the Roslyn SDK, it's going to add a syntax visualizer tool, which I can then come in here and highlight the line of code that I want to take a look at, and it's going to navigate directly into the syntax tree of where that particular line of code is. I can then see that we have a field declaration, it's a variable declaration that has a defined type and a variable declarator with an equal value clause of a numeric literal expression with a numeric literal token of 18. You got all that? Now, if this isn't really clear, I can also come in here and assign that over on type it over on here, and it'll show you exactly, follow along with what you're doing in your code. I don't recommend having this open while you're coding because it does take some of the processing time to keep these in sync, but it is helpful if you're trying to do this. So if I say I want to take my field declaration, I can also come in here and view a direct graph syntax of that line and see exactly what the tree looks like for that particular line of code. That's kind of cool. But what would it take to actually, I need to have that information to be able to find things in my code, like find variables that are only one character long in their name, right? But what if I wanted to make code which can do a refactoring and change that? Well, I have to be able to create code. What does it take to create basically that one line of code? There's a little website that also the C# team created called roslynquoter.azurewebsites.net, which is kind of fun to play with. In this one, I put in a var x equals 1 plus 2, and I said, well, show me the statement and what it would take to create that statement, and hit the button to do it. And here's all of the code that I would have to write in order to write that one line of code. So if I wanted to take method that had a one character and double that character to 2 characters, I'd have to understand how to find that one character and then how to write all of this to write the 2 characters. There's a lot there, right? So we're not going to go into actually creating it all yourself today. The downloads that I have available to you already have that built out for you. There is a bug in it, which I leave there intentionally, and I have an open ability for somebody to give me a pull request to fix this bug. And it's in the hands-on labs to say what that bug is and why it's a problem, okay? So I'll give that to you as a challenge coming out of today, if anybody so desires to take that on. Let me just swing through all of this. Configuration, adding from NuGet. Here's Sonar rules, customizing the rules, say which rules you want to care about in Sonar. See the trend analysis over time from Sonar. This is static analysis. Here's Roslyn opening up the box. 1 plus 2, syntax visualizer, the graph of the tree, creating the code for it. Here is the analyzer and code fix for the API controller to be able to find the location that has a name that's not, where the base type ends in controller and API controller, but the type itself does not end in the word controller, and then fire up a, hey, we have a problem. And then we can actually fix that with a bunch of code that's actually going to create the thing and create the new controller, changing and taking all the members of the old controller, moving on to the new controller, changing out the constructor as well, because when we change the class name, the constructor name needs to change as well. Yeah. Lots of stuff here, right? But all of the codes there are available for you. Some key principles and key takeaways today. Try using these things. See how they're able to help you. See how you can learn. There's lots of things that will clue you in on terms of better practices of how you might want to do stuff. Use it often, use it as early as you can. It's hard to take it on a project that has 100,000 lines of code in it. It's pretty simple to take it onto a file new project, right? So try to start it and put that into your developer patterns from the early stage. Customize it to meet your needs. One customization I didn't tell you about was, anybody have developers that you have this stuff turned on and they ignore it? Particularly warnings. There is a compiler setting in the project itself that you can enable that says treat all warnings as errors. Turn that puppy on and they will not ignore the errors anymore. However, that means you, as the person who's now breaking the build, either owes donuts to the rest of your team, or you need to fix all of those errors at least the first time around, right? But you have the ability to do that. Add this to your SDLC process. That allows your team to focus on business stuff, providing business value, rather than trying to just find the simple code smells, right? Are you checking for nulls on public methods? If you're not, you probably should be, because otherwise you're probably going to see null reference exceptions. And how many people have had problems trying to debug? I got in my stack trace an error that came back from a customer that I had a null reference exception. Didn't say what was null. Good luck, right? So here's your links. Link to this session, link to the labs, link to my other presentations, link to my Twitter. Hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you got excited about trying it yourself. If you have any questions, again, my email, jimw@slalom.com. Happy to have conversations with you as well. I'll be at I think there's a sort of a gathering happy hour afterwards there. I'll be over there and happy to chat with you more today. So thank you very much. Have a great day.